So you want to buy a new camera, but you're on a budget. So you go online and check out what cameras are good, and then all the top videographers, photographers actually say to go full frame, no compromise. So yeah, so you go online again, Amazon, eBay, and then you check out which are the cheapest full frame cameras on the market, and then it boils down to three: Canon EOS RP, the Canon 6D Mark II, and the Sony A7II. But since the Canon 6D Mark II is so much older than the RP and the price is pretty similar, you cut that out, so you're left with the Sony A7II and the Canon EOS RP. And then the Sony A7II, when you check out the specs, it looks pretty impressive, but the only thing is that it is a 2014 December camera with 5-axis in-body stabilization, great face detection, autofocus, but you realize it's the older autofocus system, not the new ones. So it might not be as good as the new autofocus system. And yeah, being a 24.3 megapixel full frame camera, can shoot video of up to 1080p 60 frames per second. So everything looks good, because Sony's, they do come with the picture profiles if you do color grading and stuff. And then you check out on the Sony website for firmware updates, and you realize that it's not too bad. They do have a 2019 May firmware update, so that's pretty good. They do still give support to the Sony A7II. But how, or if you manage to do the update in the first place, then that's great news for you, because it is not as easy to update the firmware on the Sony cameras, unlike the other brands whereby you just take the firmware, throw it in the SD card, put it in the camera, and then it updates on its own. So it's really difficult to update Sony cameras, and for its price point with the kit lens 24-70 f3.5 to 5.6 only costs about $1,200-1,300 US. So cheapest by far full frame camera in the market. And if you're using the kit lens that comes along with the 5-axis in-body stabilization, you're gonna get OSS as well. So really good. It doesn't have 4K, no articulating screen, but that's not too bad for its price point. And then we come to the Canon EOS RP, 26.2 megapixels full frame camera, and it's so new. 2019 camera, probably towards the end of 2019, so relatively new. And they did come up with a new firmware update pretty fast to include face and eye detection. It has an articulating screen, so that's good news. It has electronic image stabilization, no IBIS, and the kit lens, the 28-105mm f4 lens, does have OIS. So stabilization looks pretty alright on paper. Normally I always prefer EIS in the first place rather than IBIS. Not many cameras can get IBIS working very well besides Panasonic. So the price point, if you include the 28-105 kit lens, probably costs about $1,700, $1,800 US. So, but it's still cheapest, second cheapest or the third cheapest in the market. Can shoot 4K, but the bad thing about shooting 4K is that it's cropped in at about 1.6 times crop factor in 4K, and you lose the electronic image stabilization, which is just plain weird to me. So you lose EIS, it's cropped in, and I believe you do lose the dual pixel autofocus as well in 4K. So basically 4K video on the RP is practically useless. So you're now comparing two cameras, the Sony A7II and the Canon EOS RP at 1080p 60 frames per second max, although the RP will probably go up to 120 frames per second in 1080p, so maybe slight benefit there. But is it worth the amount of difference in price? About $600 to $700 difference in price just to get that 120 frames per second additional feature, because no way you're gonna use 4K unless probably if you're on a tripod, stationary, you don't need the EIS, you don't mind the crop factor, because in a tripod you just move further back. So is it worth it? Is it worth the price, or should you just go to Sony? And the Sony is so much lighter with the kit lens, only about less than 1 kg, and it's so compact, it's so light. The RP is much heavier, better build quality, of course, both weather sealed, but it's so much heavier, especially that 24-105mm kit lens is extremely huge. So in terms of portability as well, the Sony A7II wins that. So basically that's today's video. I had these two cameras for a while now, probably the Sony A7II. I did buy it back in November or December, and I haven't really compared these two cameras yet. So that's what I'm gonna do today. It's raining at the moment. I'll wait for the rain to settle down, And then we'll test out Sony A7II, cheapest full-frame camera in the market, 2014, with great autofocus system, great colors. If you do color grading, you can use the picture profiles. And then we're going to challenge against the Canon EOS RP, a newer full-frame camera with eye detection, 4K video, articulating screen, better build quality, I guess. Probably better autofocusing system. I've yet to try it out. I've yet to compare it, but it should work better. The dual pixel autofocus system should perform better than the old Sony autofocus system. So we're gonna wait for the rain to stop, and then we're going out, take some photographs and video comparisons in 1080p, 30 frames and 60 frames per second. And we're gonna test out the audio quality as well. So let's get straight to the video. So here's the criteria that these two cameras will be based on. Okay, so we're going to be testing out 3 different challenges. Firstly would be the autofocus test, secondly would be the colors test, and then lastly will be the stabilization test. So let's go. Okay, so it's a really nice day. So the Sony A7II. So one thing to take note of between these two cameras is that if you are a photographer, you're probably going to be using the EVF more. And between the two, to me personally, the Sony A7II's EVF is much bigger, much clearer than the EOS RP's EVF. But in terms of the LCD screen, besides the fact that this can fully articulate, so you can do vlogging and stuff, the Sony, on the other hand, I don't really like the screen. I think this is the weakest part of the Sony cameras, even for like A7 Mark III, A66, the A6500. You can only do this, but the resolution on both, even if you are out in this kind of really bright areas with the sun above you, it's still very nice and visible. The EOS RP's resolution is much higher and it's fully touchscreen and easier to navigate than the Sony A7II. So right now I'm just going to do the start off with the autofocus test, dual pixel autofocus, 1080p 60 frames, and also Sony A7II, same thing, 1080p 60 frames because this is the max that it can go. We're going to test out the autofocus, the old Sony face detection, what was that, bird shit, autofocus system versus Canon EOS RP. So the Sony A7II is using the 28-80 kit lens, and the EOS RP is using the 24-105. So in order to keep things at exactly the same focal length, I just bumped up the EOS RP up to 28mm and also the Sony A7II up to 28mm, so that's even. And also both shooting in automatic mode. So we just start shooting off in automatic mode, then later on we can use the picture profiles on Sony A7II and also manual settings on the Canon EOS RP, whereby I just basically desaturate the colors and the shadows and stuff. Okay, so I got these two cameras side by side, and this looks lower, so okay, hopefully you can see me. Also testing out the audio microphones between the two because I haven't tested out the quality of both inbuilt microphones. So how does it look? The EOS RP is on my right and the A7II is on my left. So autofocus test, autofocus continuous. Here it has eye detection on the EOS RP, and A7II is just face detection and smile detection basically. So how does that look? Is it good? Side-by-side comparisons. The thing that made me do this video in the first place is that the Sony A7II is using the all autofocus system. So I just want to see how the all autofocus system with the 2019 firmware update, of course, on the A7II, and also the EOS RP has the latest firmware update in terms of the eye detection included, and also being able to shoot 4K at 24 frames per second. So both on the latest firmware. So how does this 2019 EOS RP versus the 2014 A7II compare in terms of the autofocus system? Dual pixel versus face detection. Again, both in automatic mode. So I think that would be enough of a test to get a good idea of how good the autofocusing is, and the microphone as well. So I'm talking in between the two at about nearly an arm's length away. So how does it look? One more test. Just gonna walk backwards. So walk a bit faster. And then we're going to go on to the picture profiles, manual shooting mode. On the A7II, I'm going to shoot in S-Log, S-Gamma 2 and the EOS RP, just my manual settings, whereby we reduce the shadows and the colors and stuff, and so that we can actually do our own color grading. So let's test it out right now. Okay, so I got the neutral color density set up on the Canon EOS RP. I just dropped most of the stuff down a bit. Don't know if you can see that, but the detail set, like contrast, saturation, and color tone, all I decreased it by -1, so it'd be slightly better to do color grading. And so as long as Gamma 2, 1080p 60 frames per second and shooting at 1/1600 ISO at f4.5. So I'm trying to bump it down to f3.5 instead. Okay, so recording both right now. Testing out the color profile. Just gonna do a shot of myself first, and then we're gonna check out the surrounding area on how good the color profiles are, which one is easier or looks better, easier for color grading. The EOS RP, definitely Canon has always had the better color science to me. Sony's, basically, if you do color grading, you can get it right at the end of the day. But straight out of the camera, the EOS, the Canons normally have a much better color, natural colors, better color science. Yeah, so we're going to take a look at the surrounding area. Get a view of the blues and the greens and the browns and the whites and stuff. So at the same time, just showing you my setup on my G9. So right now we're going to shift over to the A7II, S-Log, S-Gamma 2, 1080p 60 frames per second. Both using the same shutter speed, 1/1600, just to let you know. Good view. It will look really washed out on the screen, but once you do that color grading, it will look very, very nice. Did I just say very, very nice? I said very, very nice. Checking out the blues and the greens, the whites of the houses. Yeah, for some reason, it didn't detect as well. And right now we're going to shift to something which is really important to me, although I do have a lot of gimbals, stabilization test. So Sony A7II, this kit lens has OSS, and the body has 5-axis in-body stabilization of about 4.5 stops. But we all know that the Sony's 5-axis compared to the Panasonic's 5-axis in-body stabilization isn't really very good. And then for the Canon EOS RP, it's having a lens with OIS, optical image stabilization, and is using EIS. And the EIS so far, it's been pretty good, so we're going to test it out right now. Just going to do some handheld shots. Okay, we're going to start off from here. We're going to pan around, and then we're going to do some handheld shots. Walking. Normally, just like that. This is how I'm holding the camera. So how does it look? I'm gonna turn back. now we're gonna shift over to the Canon EOS RP, bring it down to 1600 again. Okay, so same thing, EOS RP 1/1600 shutter speed at f4, trying to use the EIS and that magnificent lens, the OIS. So you're gonna pan around, same thing as the Sony. So this is how I'm holding it. So like I said before, personally I always prefer EIS, like the GoPro's EIS, DJI Osmo Action's EIS. So far the Canon's EIS is also pretty good. But if you want a camera with really good OIS, 5-axis in-body stabilization plus OIS, that dual IS system on the Panasonic G9 is the best. So we're going to turn it around right now, walk towards the car. So how does the EIS look? Is it any good? Okay, so yeah, basically those were the 3 tests for today. One more important test, I guess, would be where the buttons on the cameras are. To me personally, I don't like the way the position of where the Sony record button, because I am more of a videographer rather than a photographer, but I don't really like the position of the Sony's record button. I do prefer the Canons, and there are also a lot more customizable buttons on the Canon EOS RP rather than the Sony A7II. So I'm not so sure how important those are to you. Normally to me it's not really important. Just adjust the settings like the shutter speed and all that, which is pretty easy on the EOS RP. It is a little bit more difficult on the Sony because of the lack of a touchscreen. The Canon has fully enabled touchscreen, so that is a lot better. So some insects biting my leg. Yep. So basically that was it, guys. We're gonna go home, put it on a computer and see how it goes, and then I'll give you my conclusions, which one would be better, the Sony A7II or the Canon EOS RP. So let's get straight to the comparisons. Okay, so here's my overall score between the 2 cameras. In terms of affordability, definitely Sony A7II, being the cheapest full-frame camera in the market, takes that point. In terms of lenses, not only does the A7II have a wider array of lenses, but also cheaper available lenses than the Canon EOS RP. In terms of portability, the A7II is slightly lighter and more compact than the Canon EOS RP. In terms of durability, the Canon EOS RP is weather sealed and feels better quality than the Sony A7II. The Sony A7II has the best EVF among most of the cameras that I've ever used, so definitely EVF goes to A7II. However, better LCD screen with higher resolution and touch enabled goes to the Canon EOS RP, not to mention the ease of use. In terms of stabilization, the Canon EOS RP's OIS plus EIS does a much better job than Sony's OSS lens with in-body stabilization. In-body stabilization has never been a strong point for Sony. In terms of autofocus, the Canon EOS RP with its dual pixel autofocus system beat Sony A7II's old face detection autofocus system. If you watch the video, the Sony A7II was out of focus for a period of time, while the Canon EOS RP was really consistent. And last of all, colors and dynamic range was a close one, but at the end of the day, the video on the Canon EOS RP was easier to color grade and it had a higher dynamic range than the Sony A7II. When you go into shaded areas, the video becomes really dark in comparison if you are out under the sun. So basically that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. Leave your comments in the comment section on whether or not you think my overall score was a fair one. So hit the subscribe button, the like button, and the notifications button, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.